Tutankhamun, the most famous pharaoh of them all. His tomb was discovered teeming with fabulous treasures, making this boy king an overnight sensation. But now, a century after its discovery, I'm going in search of the real person behind the gold mask, using the most recent revealing research to tell the boy king's story. Revolutionary DNA investigations and forensic analysis will shed light on the diseases he suffered in his youth, his everyday physical challenges, and dark family secrets. Thanks to 100 years of scientific progress, now we can get closer to the boy king than ever before. I want to try to understand the truth of Tutankhamun, to discover his world through his eyes and with his voice. I'm searching for the real Tutankhamun. As far as commutes go, it is pretty hard to beat this, crossing the Nile at dawn. Behind me is the ancient city of Thebes, modern-day Luxor, and where I'm heading is the West Bank, because that is the Valley of the Kings. I'm here because this is where the boy king Tutankhamun is buried, lying virtually undisturbed for over 3,000 years, until a century ago, when British Egyptologist Howard Carter came looking for him. One day in November 1922, Carter's team began to dig right here. They discovered the top of a flight of stone stairs leading down into the rock to what would be one of the most famous archaeological discoveries of all time, the burial place of Tutankhamun. At its heart, a nest of golden coffins, which Carter prized open to reveal the mummified body of Tutankhamun, topped with that famous mask of solid gold. But even though Carter had discovered his gold and his riches and his body, he didn't really feel that he'd got to know Tutankhamun the man. He said that his life was a mystery, and that even though the shadows had moved, the darkness hadn't dispersed. So, a century on, it's time to see if science can help to disperse that darkness. A crucial piece of evidence we have for Tutankhamun's life is thanks to one thing: the ancient Egyptian science of mummification. The ancient Egyptians thought it was crucial to preserve the bodies of their dead in places like this, the Valley of the Kings, so that they could survive through eternity. And if their bodies, and particularly their faces, weren't complete, then they believed they forfeited the chance of an afterlife. So, ancient Egyptian embalmers spent centuries trying to perfect the very best methods to preserve their body tissues, which is why so many ancient Egyptians have survived to tell us their own story. To understand the truth of Tutankhamun's story, shown by his mummy, I'm heading north. Not far from the Great Pyramid, the Sphinx, and Tutankhamun's capital is the modern city of Cairo. Today, it's where most of Egypt's royal mummies reside. I've come to Cairo's Egyptian Museum to meet old friend and paleoradiographer, Professor Sahar Salim.
Oh, lovely, how lovely to see you. Oh.
Sahar has quite literally got under the skin of 40 royal mummies.
Yes, let's go inside.
Wow, this is incredible. She was part of a unique project that scanned, microscopically examined and sampled DNA from the royal mummies of the New Kingdom, including Tutankhamun. I just have to have a moment and put my hands on here because this is where Tutankhamun Lay, this is where you scanned him, isn't it?
The actual table that his body was put on.
Amazing. What did you discover?
When I examined the CT scan of Tutankhamun, the most amazing, the very high quality of mummification this golden boy got from the embalmers. Let me show you.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Oh my gosh.
This is the profile face of the king.
Amazing. And what's this? The kind of yellow material that you can see around his mouth?
This is a filler placed underneath the skin. Even in the same place that the modern plastic surgery, they place fillers, which is around the nose and the mouth and the cheeks, and even in the temporal regions, so he would look youth and life-like.
That's really interesting. So they're sort of plumping his face to make him look beautiful in the afterlife. The scans reveal that Tutankhamun's mummy received some of the best facial care of the pharaohs being studied. So we can see his skull shape, but we don't have his voice. Are there any clues as to how he might have spoken from the scan?
This sweet boy has an overbite, and the roof of the mouth, which is the bony roof of the mouth, it has a slit. This brought more air than usual to the nose.
So he might have had a slight lisp or certainly a very distinctive voice.
If Tutankhamun would call my name instead of Sahar, he would say Sahar.
So Tutankhamun may well have talked with a lisp, thanks to an overbite and a slight cleft palate. And with communication and public profile essential for any ruler, the boy king may have been facing a big challenge straight away. Thanks to his mummification, there's plenty more for modern science to reveal about Tutankhamun's story. In 2010, the Egyptian-led team reported that they'd extracted DNA from the royal mummies, including that of Tutankhamun. Could genetics help to find Tutankhamun's family and shed light on his early years? One inscription strongly implies his father was the eccentric pharaoh Akhenaten, who reigned with the iconic queen Nefertiti. But Akhenaten had more than one wife. So who was Tutankhamun's mother? A discovery here in a tomb in the Valley of the Kings could at last reveal who his mother was and what happened to her. Now, it's not normally open to the public, but I've been allowed in. Shukran. I think I'm going to take that. Thank you. Oh, these are beautiful. So that's Anubis, the god of the dead, welcoming the pharaohs to the afterlife. It's around a 50-meter journey deep into the rock, through pillared halls and painted walkways, until finally the inner sanctum, the burial chamber. This is the sarcophagus of Amenhotep II. So that's Tutankhamun's great-great-grandfather. And this whole tomb was made for him, but he wasn't the only person who ended up here. In a side chamber, a stash of unidentified royal mummies were discovered, who'd probably been hidden here to keep them safe from tomb raiders. Now, archaeologists named two of them, the elder lady and the younger lady. And when that revolutionary DNA work was done on the younger lady, she was identified as Tutankhamun's mother. I'm about to uncover shocking evidence of Tutankhamun's childhood and the dark secrets of his family. That's a terrible, terrible wound. Tutankhamun's childhood is a mystery. Even the identity of his parents has been hard to pin down. But the latest genetic research has given us a promising lead, taking us directly to a body that could be his mother. These remarkable mummified remains are usually kept under lock and key in Cairo's Egyptian Museum. She could lift the veil on a great secret of Tutankhamun's childhood. My goodness, she looks so vulnerable, doesn't she?
Yes.
She's been studied by Professor Sahar Salim. So what did your investigation tell you about her?
She was quite young when she died. If you know that her wisdom teeth were not erupted yet, she was maybe about 25 years old. But what strikes me is her condition and all these wounds and injuries.
Because, I mean, that's a terrible wound in her chest.
This is what we see from the act of the tomb thieves. This is what they do to break the body in order to get the gold and the amulets inside.
But what about this thing on her face? Was that the same thing, do you think, or has that happened at a different time?
This is what we thought. But actually, the CT scan revealed something else. It revealed that this injury happened before mummification. So this could have killed her because she could have choked from her own blood and also the fractured bones going to the airway tract. So this could be fatal.
And we know the injury didn't happen long before she died because the CT scan shows no signs of healing around the trauma. Can you tell what instrument was used to hit her in her face? Because, I mean, it's a terrible strike, isn't it?
It should be a high-impact force. And this usually happens with a blunt trauma, a club with a stoned head, or from a very forcible kick.
What do you think? Do you think it's an accident, or do you think this was an attack?
It looks like an attack.
The DNA work tells us that she is Tutankhamun's mother. That's right,
Yes,
is it?
yes. She's Tutankhamun's mother, and she also the sister of Akhenaten.
Okay, so she's her husband's sister as well. So it seems, incredibly, that I'm sitting here with the mother of Tutankhamun, which, of course, is a once-in-a-lifetime experience. This poor woman clearly suffered a terrible, violent death. So what this mummy is telling us is that as Tutankhamun was growing up, there was serious trouble in his household. So, how about his father? What can his story tell us about Tutankhamun's childhood? "150 miles south of Cairo, this inhospitable plain near the banks of the Nile is where Tutankhamun grew up. Nearly 3,500 years ago, a shining new capital stood here, built by the pharaoh Akhenaten, whose reign preceded that of Tutankhamun. Akhenaten and his favorite queen, Nefertiti, had started a radical new religion. Now, for Egyptians, instead of worshipping thousands of gods, power was concentrated in one, the sun god, or Aten. So this is the great sun god, the Aten, always represented like this as a disc with these life-giving rays reaching out to the earth, and in particular here to Akhenaten and his queen, Nefertiti. I have to say, I just adore this image because it's so informal and intimate. So you've got this royal couple playing with and chucking and just kind of adoring their own daughters here. But this picture of family bliss hides a tragic reality. Akhenaten's reign did not go well. There were military failures, widespread plague, and by the time he died, after around 17 years in power, Egyptians had had enough of his newfangled religion and were sick of Akhenaten. The dynasty was in mortal danger. What happened next would be crucial for its survival and possibly for the survival of Egypt itself. Much evidence from the time has either been lost or deliberately destroyed. There could have been a power struggle. But what we know for sure is that pretty soon after Akhenaten died, aged just 9, Tutankhamun came to the throne. So you wonder how a young boy like this could manage to survive, let alone thrive in this condition of chaos. And there may have been something that made Tutankhamun's life even more challenging. Questions over his health. Thanks to the latest scans, this is something we can now investigate to a level of detail that would have amazed his discoverer, Howard Carter. Karen, this is the most remarkable thing. Forensic bioarchaeologist, Dr. Carolyn Rando, is going to take me inside Tutankhamun's body for a unique post-mortem.
We are looking at a reconstructed CT scan of Tutankhamun here. So when they take a CT scan, it's lots of little slices going up the body, dun, 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 as we go. And then the computer reconstructs it into this really incredible 3D image that we're seeing here. It actually means that we can go up and down through the layers of the body to look inside in a way that wouldn't be possible through just external examination or even really through kind of taking him apart.
It's so incredible to see this, I've got to say. What you really get the sense of here is this, he's got quite a distinctive skull shape, hasn't he?
He does, yes. This is really where it looks very incredible, is he has a very, very long skull compared to most people that we would see today, which would maybe have a more rounded or more bulbous skull.
Now, there's some evidence that this extraordinary skull shape was a trait in his family, so could it also be inbreeding? Could we read that into the skull shape?
Interbreeding between close relatives, you can get things called congenital disorders, which are passed down through familial lines, and those could cause something called craniostenoses. But if there was this degree of inbreeding, and if there was this much possible congenital difficult diseases coming from it, we would actually expect the teeth to change. So what happens is that you get missing teeth, but also other teeth would swap positions and get all a bit weird. So the fact that he doesn't possibly suggest that whatever interbreeding that may have been going on wasn't that severe or wasn't causing any particularly serious genetic problems.
It would seem that Tutankhamun's health wasn't affected by inbreeding as much as some have claimed. 130 walking sticks were found in Tutankhamun's tomb. So were these ceremonial, or did he actually need them to walk?
Tell me about his feet, because there's a lot of conversation about whether he had some kind of issues with one of his feet.
So the right and the left foot, they do appear to look quite different from each other. So there is some indication that something was going on. We can see that in his left foot here, it is quite a high, really quite marked arch. Whereas on this foot, it looks almost completely flat, like he's walking completely flat-footed. So he was probably putting more weight on his right foot for some reason and less weight on his left foot. But what we can do is actually switch it to an X-ray view. So if we take a look at his feet a little bit more, this area in there is a bit dark. And what that means is that we don't have as much bone there as we have in other parts of the foot. And it looks like we're missing the very top of that bone there, which could suggest that actually this area there is necrosis or tissue death happening on that bone.
I mean, if that's the case, that's going to be very painful.
It absolutely would. I mean, it's a possible bone infection, possibly something called osteomyelitis, and that would be really bacteria in the bone, in the wound. It would be, I think, quite painful, to be honest with you. And even if you didn't have a need for a cane before, it might be something like this could support the need to have a little bit of a support weight.
Poor boy.
If Tutankhamun was affected by disabilities, that raises another question. could this have undermined his acceptance as king?
Do we have any ideas what attitudes to...
Dr. Sophia Aziz studies disability in ancient Egypt.
If he did have some form of disability, if he had had a club foot, for instance, would that have been a problem for the ancient Egyptians?
Remarkably, no. The ancient Egyptians were very enlightened, so for them, disability was a divine attribute. So Tutankhamun would not have been stigmatized if he did have a club foot. He would have actually been seen as special.
And why is that? Because that's kind of counterintuitive. It's not what we'd imagine.
We've actually found some wisdom texts which are actually written for children. And in these wisdom texts, they say, don't make fun of the dwarves, don't tease the blind, and treat people with disabilities with respect and dignity.
So thinking about Tutankhamun, one thing that you can tell from his facial features is that he definitely has an overbite. Would that have been considered a problem?
An overbite can cause some speech impediment, but this would not have affected him in a negative way in ancient Egypt at all.
Do you think that's something to do with religious attitudes then? Because, of course, in ancient Egypt, you have the life that you're living in the here and now, and then there's this second life, the afterlife, which is as important, if not more important, for Egyptians.
I think that's a huge part of it. The ancient Egyptians, they did not expect perfection in life. That was actually reserved for the afterlife.
This has made me think about Tutankhamun in a quite different way. Rather than a boy perhaps pitied for his disabilities, maybe he was simply accepted for what he was, the king, albeit a very young one. Next, I want to find out about his life on the throne and whether forensic research can tell us what or who was responsible for his tragic early death.
He has some sort of impact from the side, and it can very quickly translate to death.
During a turbulent time in Egyptian history, around 1300 BCE, Tutankhamun came to the throne. He was aged just 9. Much of the detail of his reign has been lost, but as far as we know, he was crowned in the traditional way.
Tutankhamun's coronation took place here at Karnak, the temple complex that honoured the traditional god of Amun in the town of Luxor. First, he'd been purified, probably with oil and water, and then on entering the temple, his transformation began. Now, the Egyptians really knew how to throw a party, and you should just try to imagine the spectacle here. It must have been extraordinary and mind-blowing and pulsing with meaning. There'd have been dancing girls doing backflips and musicians, and Tutankhamun would have worn a series of crowns and costumes and carried scepters and weapons, all representing his religious and political power. The guy was only 9, so can you imagine the pressure of expectation? One event must have involved some serious logistics. He shot an arrow into every corner of the temple, and as he did so, a flock of birds was released to prove that he had mastery of nature and of the world.
But the reality was, as soon as he took the throne, Tutankhamun's life was all about survival. His own and that of his dynasty. Even though he was only 9, Tutankhamun was expected to take at least one wife. In the ancient Egyptian royal family, it wasn't uncommon for brothers and sisters to marry one another. This was partly inspired by a popular myth where a goddess marries her brother. But more practically, it was about keeping power in the family. So Tutankhamun married his older sister, Ankhesenamun.
There are lots of images on the treasures in Tutankhamun's tomb that show the couple together, like this beautiful one on this fabulous golden throne. This is his queen here in this wonderful silver dress, and she's rubbing his skin with oil. It's a really intimate picture, and that's appropriate because these two had to have a relationship because it was their responsibility to produce an heir so that the dynasty could continue.
And there's intriguing and tragic evidence from the tomb that they tried to do just that. 2 shoebox-sized coffins, in each a stillborn baby. But who are they? The Egyptian-led project succeeded in extracting a tiny amount of DNA, just enough to indicate that Tutankhamun is indeed the father. Their sad deaths may have been down to an incestuous union, and without children, the dynasty was in peril.
For a child king and queen, this was an incredibly challenging world to negotiate.
Now, Tutankhamun would have been constantly on show, officiating at ceremonies, holding his own amongst courtiers. Isn't it tantalizing to imagine what he might have sounded like? Well, there is some evidence.
Today, there are some people who still speak a language connected to the language of Tutankhamun, the Coptic community.
Some ancient Egyptian is preserved in Coptic vocabulary.
Demotic Egyptian is basically a kind of street version of the ancient Egyptian language, and it was really widely spoken and written down. And Coptic is a direct descendant of that.
As is some of their music. The melody of this Easter hymn has been traced right back to a burial chant from ancient Egypt, music that might have been heard at Tutankhamun's own funeral. And now, for the first time, we can hear Tutankhamun's words spoken in Coptic.
This is as close as you can come to the sound of Tutankhamun's world, and possibly even the voice of Tutankhamun himself.
So, what kind of pronouncements did the young king make? Probably the greatest that we know of was unearthed here, in the Temple of Karnak. And it reads like a bid for political survival.
Stele like this were basically giant stone press releases that publicised the policies and achievements of a king. And here, Tutankhamun does not hold back. So in this whole area, he's basically describing the failings of his father's reign.
The temples of the gods and goddesses had been neglected, which had become mounds overgrown with weeds.
But he is going to do things differently. So here, we hear that he restored what was once ruins.
So His Majesty made monuments for the gods, fashioning their cult statues of gold, building their sanctuaries anew, and monuments for the ages of eternity.
It's really fascinating, this, because this is telling us that Tutankhamun isn't just an ineffectual boy king. He is a real political player.
Is there any evidence that young Tutankhamun put his words into practice? I'm back in Karnak to take a closer look at what these 3,300-year-old remains can tell us about him.
This is my old friend, Mahmoud, and I'm incredibly lucky because he's agreed to let me in to have a look at this archaeological site that you don't normally get access to.
تفضلي.
Thank you, shukran. All along this grand processional way, these sphinxes were decorated with the heads of Akhenaten and his queen Nefertiti. But Tutankhamun changed all that in a grand political statement. He knocked off the human heads and replaced them with these, with ram heads, which are the symbol of the great god Amun. So basically, Tutankhamun was saying, don't worry, I'm putting everything back to how it once used to be. We're returning to the good old days.
It would appear that Tutankhamun did make an effort to restore Egypt to the traditional ways. But of course, he was just a boy and must have been dependent on guidance from military leaders and powerful advisors. Did they really care about doing what he wanted at all? Or did they see this kid as someone they could exploit to do their bidding? There's certainly evidence that those who came after him claimed his achievements as their own and even erased his memory.
Elsewhere in the temple, his name and his face have physically been scrubbed out. So it makes you wonder whether those people that he thought of as his friends and allies in his lifetime were actually out to get him.
Could Tutankhamun have been murdered? What does the evidence say? His mummified body certainly has a lot of broken bones. Howard Carter and his team were responsible for much of the damage as they investigated Tutankhamun's mummy.
I mean, this poor boy, he suffered during his life, but his body's been really brutalized after his death, too.
The descriptions of how the mummy was taken out do look quite brutal, and I think this particular wound that we see here in the torso is definitely from that initial excavation because there is comments about them dismembering the body into pieces.
I'm shocked by that dismemberment mark that you can show, because I mean that's what people do, you know, if there are horrific murders and they're trying to dispose of the body.
Yeah, it's quite traumatic, and I think a lot of the other damage that we see is a result of this kind of forceful kind of pulling of the body out of the tomb. So if we just kind of go down through the layers, so the bones themselves appear quite fragile in a lot of places, but you can actually see where the ribs have just been broken, like all the way down here. We're missing an entire section of rib here. So here on the arm, we see these what look like cuts going up and down. But if I just do this, we can actually see that they're just very superficial rips in the skin, actually. So they're caused by the mummy being jostled around a little bit by moving from anything. Mummy skin is almost like paper, and it can break with almost no touch whatsoever. Very, very easy to break.
Let's just look at his skull, because, you know, there have been stories about him being a murder victim, that he was maybe attacked by a kind of blunt instrument, but can you see that here?
Well, I think there might be some evidence to the contrary. If we just look at the outside of the skull, just to start with, it all looks completely normal, completely intact. There's no obvious signs of any trauma or anything like that.
One of the things people said was that they could see this sort of suspicious blur inside his skull, and it's probably a hemorrhage, but what was going on there?
That's actually quite incredible. So if we use the really incredible tools on here for dissection, we can actually go right inside the head, and there you go.
Wow.
What could be a big, giant pool of resin.
Resin. That's incredible.
The skull isn't filled with blood, but with resin from the mummification process.
What about the leg bones? Because, again, there's a theory about, you know, he had an accident chariot racing and got sepsis. What can you tell from what's going on there?
So if we have a look at his legs down here, So what we can see is that on this outer portion of his femur, so on his left side, there appears to be some sort of cracking or a break right there. So it could suggest that he's had some sort of impact from the side hitting the top of his knee, and it may have put it out slightly out of joint. It could have dislocated it a little bit, along with causing this large potential fracture. It is very difficult to say how close to around his death this happened. So there's no healing, so he didn't survive long after it.
So is there a chance that that could have killed him? Probably not the break, but if there'd been some kind of infection.
If the skin was broken, you're going to probably get bone infection. And he could have easily gone septic from having a bone infection like that. So you just get septicemia, and it can very quickly translate to death. But it's very difficult in a single individual in a skeleton to say cause of death, because we can know what they died with, but we don't know if it's what they died from. That's the tricky part.
But there's another possibility. Lurking deep inside Tutankhamun's body, scientists have discovered DNA from another species. Could this explain his early death? A few years ago, samples from Tutankhamun's mummified remains were extracted and genetically analysed, with unexpected results. Inside Tutankhamun's body was discovered DNA that wasn't his. It wasn't even human. It belonged to a single-celled organism called a plasmodium that's injected into the body by one of these, the Anopheles mosquito, the creature that carries malaria. In fact, they found evidence proving that Tutankhamun had suffered serious infections on a number of occasions. And they found this in other mummies as well. The oldest genetic evidence for malaria in mummified remains anywhere in the world.
As you can imagine, this environment is perfect for mosquitoes, just as it was in ancient times, particularly now when the river's at flood level. And because so many ancient religious festivals happened on the river and so many palaces and temples were built on its banks, even for a pharaoh, the mosquito was a familiar, if unwelcome, friend. So, could a mosquito bite have been a cause of Tutankhamun's death? Well, a malarial infection is certainly a possibility. I mean, if you think about it, malaria is still one of the biggest killers in the world today. But even if it didn't finish him off, then a series of repeated infections could well have weakened the boy king. The million-dollar question we all want answering is exactly how and why Tutankhamun died. But the problem is we just don't yet have enough evidence to come to a really definite conclusion. Some powerful men possibly stood to gain from his death, but there's no detectable sign of murder on his body. He withstood several infections of malaria, but the disease doesn't seem to have killed him. And that compound fracture of his femur may have resulted in sepsis, but again, no obvious signs of that. So maybe it's something a bit more subtle. A young man with physical challenges who was weakened by malaria and so susceptible to infection. And there's another fascinating thought now that experts think it could well be a virus that brought him down in that susceptible state. And we're only too aware right now how incredibly deathly viruses can be. The truth is, at the moment, we don't know. So it's a mystery that Tutankhamun is still holding on to. But there's another mystery. A huge question for Egyptologists. How was Tutankhamun's body preserved in the first place? Well, just recently,
a Danish researcher deciphered a massive ancient Egyptian papyrus. This is just a tiny part of it.
And she's found that buried deep in here, there is nothing less than the recipe for mummification. So we know exactly what ingredients were used, and it's things like myrrh and incense and oil of byblos and oil of Lebanon and bull fat. And not only that, but this dates from the 18th dynasty. So this is from the time of Tutankhamun. So this is the recipe for the mummification of Tutankhamun's body.
It's modern research edging us closer to the truth of his life and death. In all, this mummification took 70 days. The first 35 were devoted to removing the internal organs and drying the body with a salt called natron, during which there were probably processions every 4 days. At the halfway stage, the wrapping phase of the mummification began. As part of this, red linen was used, soaked in all those fantastic ingredients that were then pressed onto Tutankhamun's face to give this incredible smoothness to his face and his skin. The face and the rest of the body were encased in a kind of protective antibacterial cocoon. The whole process was repeated every 4 days or so until the final wraps were applied. And it worked, didn't it? I mean, he's well over 3,000 years old, and he does not look too bad. Next, Tutankhamun was prepared for his journey to the afterlife in a sacred rite shown on the wall of his tomb. That man on the right there is I, who was one of Tutankhamun's generals and former advisors. But we know now that he's a king because he's wearing that beautiful blue crown. And what you can't fail to notice that he's draped in a leopard skin. And the reason for that is that he's performing the function of a priest here. He's using a flint blade in what was called the opening of the mouth ceremony. And the idea was that even in the afterlife, Tutankhamun could use his voice. He could speak with his mummified tongue. So now Tutankhamun was ready to join the stars in the heavens. Here in the tomb, a small effigy of the king was discovered, and on it was written a prayer to Nut, the great goddess of the cosmos. Descend on me, my mother. Spread yourself over me, so I may now become one of the imperishable stars. After a decade on the throne, Tutankhamun died without any surviving children. He was just 19. I do feel that I've come closer to Tutankhamun on this journey. He is fascinating and inspiring and vulnerable. He was the son of an unpopular king, and his mother was probably brutally murdered. It seems that he suffered all kinds of physical challenges, and he really had to fight to keep hold of power. But now science is revealing the truth of his story. And because of the discovery of his tomb, Tutankhamun is one of the most famous pharaohs of all time. Tutankhamun lives because we are still saying his name.
Tutankhamun, ruler of Thebes, given life like Ra eternally.